Everyone. Hi everyone, welcome to another Tuesday session. And today we have another IMG VMR. And today we have a very special guest. So we have Dr. Andrew Gutwein, and he's a program director for the internal medicine residency at the Jacobi Medical Center. And he's an associate professor of medicine at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. So, Dr. Goodwine, do you want to unmute yourself and maybe tell us a little bit what do you do when you're not thinking of medicine or some fun fact about you?
Fun fact. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I'm a martial artist. I've been practicing for 36 years. I'm not allowed to use it on the house staff, but I find that's a good way to relax and focus on something other than medicine. I also like reading nonfiction books.
Wow, that is really interesting. Oh my God. Yeah, that's a really good way. And actually, let's kick off this session and with the first question. Is that okay?
Sure, go for it.
Okay, so Dr. Goodwine, for your experience, what is the most important part of the residence application? Can be like letter recommendation, personal statement score, anything that you consider the most important part.
It's going to sound a little ironic, but the most important part technically is actually your step scores, because the program director is never even going to see your application if your scores are so low that the program coordinator screens them out with filters before the program director can ever see them in the first place. So as much as I hate to say that a test is actually the most important part, in that way it really is. Once you get past that kind of sort of mundane threshold, then really, in my estimation, the most important part is actually the letters of recommendation, because this is someone, hopefully, that's really gotten a chance to know you over somewhere between a week and 8 weeks, depending on what you've done for your rotations. And they really have a feel for your skills, how your communication is. Communication is one of the hardest things to figure out from the rest of your application. Your transcript, your MSPE, all those kinds of things as IMGs, they're not going to say a lot about your communication skills, whereas the leisure recommendation are really going to give me an idea about your abilities in that area. That's one of the most important competencies to assess from most program directors' perspective.
Oh, no, you can go, Hui. Don't worry.
So, Dr. Goodwine, and speaking of like the letter recommendation, what would be a good letter recommendation?
What would be a good letter? I mean, the best part about the letter is if somebody really gets to know you well. So having as much face time with that person, hopefully it's a US faculty member, but if it's not, even if it's an international letter, as long as the person really got a lot of time rounding with you, talking to you about cases, getting a feel for your clinical reasoning, for your ability to talk to patients, all of those things will be reflected, especially if they can tell a story. One of my favorite things about letters is if the letter writer is telling you a story, is telling in the letter a story about something they watched you do. And that really gives us a feel for the person like no other thing can. And that's also why at an interview day itself, if you are lucky and you actually get the interview, when you're being interviewed, telling stories from your experience will really let the interviewer get a feel for you. And you should try to find ways in which you can do that based on their questions. If you want me to talk more about certain things, just tell me, keep going, or tell me to pick another part of that topic or something like that. I'm not by nature a very gregarious, talkative person.
No, if you have anything else to add about letter of recommendation, but I think was a great answer. And but another thing that we were trying to ask, it's like when you are reading like a personal statement, what make you stop and say, okay, this will be good, or make you say you roll your eyes and close and say, no, I don't want to read this anymore.
Yeah, that first paragraph is obviously all important. As they say, like with giving a talk, like a lecture or a speech, you have to find a hook for the audience, something that grabs them right from the beginning. Otherwise, they're pretty much out and doing email on their phone after the first few minutes. So it's the same thing with the personal statement. The first few sentences should really hook the reader, usually me or one of the faculty, and get us interested. So it's not going to be starting off with a quote from Osler. I see that, so often, some quote from some famous person. Like, I've seen that a million times. Most of the time when I read those quotes, that's not something that's hooking me in. Whereas, like I said, about kind of finding a way to tell a story of something interesting from your experience, that's more likely to hook in the reader. For the most part, personal statements, unfortunately, 99% of the time, are really only going to be able to hurt you, and very rarely that 1% is going to help you. Like, I can think of only a few, maybe 4 personal statements per year out of so many hundreds or even thousands that we get, where I'm like, wow, I really need to meet this person. Otherwise, most of the time, it's just mundane, or like I find grammar errors, spelling errors, things that make you look like you haven't really, done a good job thinking through your career decisions. And those, of course, might be red flags that could hurt you. I would suggest keeping it relatively short. We do get thousands. My program had 5,600 applicants last year. It's essentially impossible to really read through 5,600 entire personal statements. So keep it to a half a page, at most 1 page. If you're going over that, nobody's reading that. And show through what your stories you're telling, what your thought process is, why you're choosing internal medicine, not necessarily why you want to be a cardiologist from birth or something like that. Even if you do want to be a cardiologist from birth, that's okay. That's not the end of the world, but you're applying to internal medicine. You're not applying directly to cardiology. So give us a feel for what enticed you to that field, what happened during your clerkships or sub-internships or the equivalent in other countries that caused you to really think of that specialty most highly, and not just, I like to solve puzzles. Like, we hear those kind of cliches way too often. That may actually be a pretty decent reason to pick internal medicine, but tell us about a puzzle you solved. That's a more interesting way of explaining why you like to solve puzzles, by giving us some examples of things that happened to you that made you interested in that, and not just the cliche of it. Also, things you definitely shouldn't do. Don't write about a sick relative from your childhood, like your grandfather who had a heart attack, and ever since then you wanted to go into cardiology. Like, that may be true, but it's not really a good reason for like an entire career and life choice. You should have other things that have gone on in your training, in your medical school, etc., for what led you down that path more, or what research stimulated your brain more, or whatever it is. But not just, grandpa dying. That it's just not, it's not good enough. It might have been what started the spark, but there's got to be more to it than that. And don't recapitulate your CV. We see that also way too often, where someone will say, and then I did this, and then I did that, and then I did that, and they're talking about their experiences, but they're really just laying out their resume. And we've read your resume. We don't need you to tell us that again. I already mentioned the quotes from famous people. I guess something new that's come up over the last year, of a not to do, in my personal opinion, is don't try to have an AI write your paper for you. Even if you're then going to go over what the AI wrote and make tweaks or make adjustments or whatever, like, it's a very bad idea. I don't have immense experience with this yet, only seen a few articles and a few examples shown of AI writing things like this. But I have to believe that anyone like myself, at least, I have 14 years at Jacobi as a program director, and a couple of years at Westchester Medical Center as a program director before that. So I've read a ton of these. I've read something like 50,000 personal statements. That I'm going to know it wasn't a naturally written thing. I'm sorry, the AIs are just probably not that good yet. So it should come from your heart. It should be something that flows out of you. And then after you let it flow out and written it, show it to your friends, show it to some mentors from, either the country you're from, or if you have connections in America to somebody who has read personal statements in America, maybe an associate program director or a program director, or at least a faculty member you've worked with in America, show it to them too, and let them give you some feedback about how different parts are coming across. Are things too robotic or too boring, or whatever it is, and certainly for grammar and spelling errors, like we said before. So there's a lot of things to think about there. The one last thing I would add is you guys get to signal 7 programs in internal medicine nowadays. It's a relatively new phenomenon, as you know. It only started 2 years ago. The first year you could signal 5, and the second year, and now going on moving forward, you'll be able to signal 7 programs as the ones you're trying to tell them, where you're really interested in them, as like a very high on your list, at least before interview season. You could consider doing something a little bit more savvy, like adjusting those 7 personal statements to be more specific to the program. What about your interest in medicine or whatever specialty you're going to go into makes you a good fit for Jacoby, using my program as an example? Why might we better be able to, optimize your training than another place? Maybe you've looked at our website. I imagine if you signaled that program, you probably looked at their website, maybe even talked to a friend of yours that went to that program. It'd be a sophisticated idea for those 7 to write out slightly different personal statements that attack and address that program's interest in you. Even though I'm sure you can't write one for all 100 places you apply to, or however many you apply to, but maybe for those 7, it would be worth it. What I see in the past is many people putting at the very end of the personal statement, and I really want to be at Jacoby. That doesn't change anything when I read it. It took you 8 seconds to write that one sentence in, and for all I know, you did it for all 100 programs. So I wouldn't bother doing that. If you're gonna bother doing anything, I would say the 7 that you signaled, try making some subtle adjustments to optimize for that program. Was that useful? Anything else about the personal statement I could talk about?
Definitely useful. Like I'm taking notes, and I'm definitely watching this later. So just so everyone knows that this will be recorded. This is recorded, and we'll put it on YouTube later. So thank you so much. Now, shift a little bit more onto interviewing. Now that we've spoken about personal statement and signaling, what are the do's and don'ts of an interview, and what do you look for when you're interviewing a candidate?
Yeah, so what I tell my house staff when they're thinking about applying for fellowships is don't just try to be the doctor that the program wants. Try to be the person that they want to work with. By the time they've read your file, they have a pretty good idea from it, based on your step scores, based on your transcript, and all the other stuff that people have said in there about you, that you're probably pretty smart, you're probably pretty, well trained in medical school and all those things. You're probably going to do okay in a residency. We don't know which one you'll be optimized for. We can talk about that in a minute. But what about the person that they really want to be around for 3 years? That's what you can really show on the interview day with how you interact, your interpersonal skills. If you show interest in the program, look up the programs that you're interviewing at and see what are their special areas that they have extra of. Ask questions specific to the program. When I do my 55-minute, I do almost an entire hour of a presentation on the interview day. And then after that, all the applicants are being interviewed at my program. The ones that are actually asking me a more sophisticated question based on something I said during my 55-minute presentation shows they were paying attention, shows they're actually interested in my program. They want to know more about some special aspect that we have that maybe other programs didn't have, that they looked up or interviewed at. So try to really work on that side of things about how you're coming across by maybe doing practice interviews with friends, practice interviews with your medical school if they offer it, practice interviews with American faculty, just because it'll be American physicians interviewing you, so they'll be able to better tell you how you're coming across from the American perspective. A lot of you interviewing will be introverts, and a lot of you will be extroverts. The extroverts, it's obviously a bit easier. They're more naturally attuned to coming across in a more fluent way, a more outgoing way. And we don't have to convert you from an introvert to an extrovert to be a doctor, but you would at least have to know how to turn it on at the right moments to come across the right way. Just like when you're talking to a patient, you're going to need, even if you're an introvert, you need to be able to turn it on to have that, robust history taking session and really get them to trust you and buy into you. You're going to be able to do it during that, even if you're an introvert. Same thing for the interview. I'm trying to think if I should address any more parts of that. Are there other parts of the interview day I should talk about?
No, actually, I should continue a little bit about, the personality, what we're looking for in the resident. So there's a question in the chat from Lee, and he asked, what is a quality that every Jacobi resident should possess?
That gets at I sort of put it on hold during the last question where I said about getting into a residency program doesn't necessarily mean you'll fit into any one given residency program, and that gets to fit. So the people that are Jacobians, as we all call ourselves there, they are the people that are the ones that are really going to thrive in the busy inner city hospital environment that we have, this public hospital. So we're trying to figure out when we're interviewing people who's going to fit in here, not just who's smart. Again, like I said, all 300 people we invite for an interview, they're pretty damn smart. I'm not worried about that. But which one is going to thrive in our relatively intense kind of environment? And every program director around the country is probably doing the exact same thing. They have a rural program who's going to fit in better with that population. Maybe they have a program that's in a private hospital setting, and they'll have to deal with multiple private faculty that are, or private attendings, and how are they going to handle patients that are from a more affluent part of the population? Everybody has something a little bit different. And they're all trying to get that feel for you. People who have telling me that they want to work with the underserved. And that's the kind of population we have. Are they also telling a consistent story in their application? Like, do they have volunteerism during their medical school time or after medical school before they applied in volunteering? Maybe they're telling me they want to be in leadership roles in the future. Some people even tell me on the interview day they want to work towards being a chief resident by the end of their 3 years. They can stay for a 4th year. But do they tell a consistent story? Do they have other leadership positions that they had in medical school or in volunteer associations or NGOs or whatever? And then that really shows that they are building that direction. So we're looking for the fit, but you also want to see, is this person telling a story that makes sense, where it's somebody that is really building a crescendo into a certain specific future? Have they given thought to that? That's the kind of thing we're trying to weigh in that time.
Yeah, thank you so much. And more, I think on today I was watching the videos on YouTube, and there's more tips for interviews. So we have a lot of things to talk here. So if anyone wants more tips, you can see on the YouTube of the Dr. Andrew, you find there. There's a lot of questions in the chat now about the geographic preference for IMG and what you think about that.
Yeah, it can be a little tricky because for many of you where you're not tied down to one area, like AMGs tend to be a little bit more tied down to one area because of family or some other reason, significant other, things like that, a partner. But the IMGs a little bit more have a little bit more freedom. They're not necessarily as tied down, and then they can put that they're not interested in any one area. They're just willing to go, and they should free text that right in. If I remember from last year, there was an area where they can say they have no geographic preference, and they can free text in, and you can just say, I'm motivated to get the best training possible, no matter where it is in America. And that's something I appreciated. I thought that really told me why this person didn't have a geographic signal. Because the tricky part for the other people that are more interested in one area from the IMG crew, for whatever reason you want the Northeast, for whatever reason you want near Florida, whatever, you're going to, check off that geographic area, and people like me are going to see nothing there. We're not going to see anything written there, and we know that means you checked off another geographic area. And so it might say to someone like myself, maybe this person looks fantastic on paper, but if I offer them an interview, are they really going to have me anywhere high in their interview list? And my guess is probably no. Having said that, when I go through ERAS, and every single program director will be different, so you can't just take what I say as the gospel of the Lord. I don't know why I said that. I'm actually a Jewish person. I'm not paying a lot of attention to the geographic part. I am paying a lot of attention to the signaling part. That, I think, really tells me the people that are like having me very high on their list, because let's face it, I can't interview 5,600 people. I can only interview about 300 we're doing this coming year. And if I fill that up with lots of people that haven't signaled, I run the risk of not filling all my spots. So for instance, in the way I did it last year, I think I might have tweeted this. It's at Andrew Gutwein for those interested. I might have said on it that about 3/4 of our spots, our interview spots, went to people that signaled us, and about 1/4 went to people that didn't signal us, because I also wanted to try to interview some of those best of the best that didn't signal us and see if I can convert them, make them really interested in Jacoby, based on my 1 hour presentation and their interview day, where I think we show them that we have a lot to offer. So that, to me, the signal is more important than the geography, but that, again, it'll be different for every single program director. There's probably lots of smaller programs that are, in less intensely busy cities like New York City, where we are, more rural or suburban programs, where the geography is going to come in much more into play. They want to know why you're applying to, rural Georgia or rural Oklahoma or some specific area like that. And then maybe you can put in and free text in, why you're drawn to those areas. Maybe it's for a significant other or family or whatever. But it is tricky, I admit, the geography.
That's true. Honestly, I think that for IMGs, that's a very big like question mark for a lot of us. Like, should we signal them? Should we not? And there is something that we would like to know about this signaling, that many times we are wondering, like, is it okay if we send letters of interest or signal a program and tell you, hey, program director, Dr. Andrew, I'm going to match you very high. I'm guessing that it will be a very red flag if I didn't match you very high and I would have told you, right? But what do you think about it?
Yeah, the letter of interest, I get hundreds and hundreds of letters of interest for the program. And to be blunt, I don't have time to read hundreds and hundreds of extra emails. My job is already really busy. And I'm not speaking for every program director out there, but I think on average, most of them will probably agree with me that the letters of interest do essentially nothing. I would say maybe for very small programs that are a little bit more rural or suburban, maybe it would be useful, but really we're going to find out who's really interested with that signal anyway. So the letters of intent and letters of interest, I wouldn't spend a lot of time with that. If you're not going to sleep at night because you didn't send them, okay, send them, whatever. It's not the end of the world. I personally just stick them into an email folder without reading them. And that way, if I ever want to go back to it for some reason, I can always go back to that email. Like maybe we are interviewing the person and I want to see something that they wrote from before or something like that. But for the most part, I wouldn't spend a lot of your mental worry about interview season worrying about letters of interest and letters of intent. As for the letters at the end of the interview season, when you're saying, hey, I interviewed at all my places and I'm going to rank you number one or rank you high or rank you whatever, I have two thoughts. One of them I tweeted about last year, actually, which was when I said that several people, I forget exactly how many it was, I went back and looked to see after we matched people who had sent me something saying you were either the word top or number one, presuming meaning number one, both of those. And multiple people that had sent me top or number one didn't come to my program. And I think that's not professional. I think it really reflects poorly on you. You never know. You don't want to burn any bridges. You might want to come back to Jacoby for a HEMONC fellowship. You might want to come to Jacoby eventually for being a hospitalist. I mean, I don't know what your future holds. You probably don't know for sure what your future holds. You don't want to burn bridges by lying to people. I just think it's very unprofessional. I know that set off a huge Twitter storm and people having their own opinions, and I respect that, but that's my opinion. I'm allowed to have at least my opinion. So I think I said there were two things about that I would say. Yes. And then the other thing I would say about that was sending something to me, for instance, saying you're amongst my highest programs, or you're in my top 3, or you're in my top tier, or something like that at the end of the interview season. What I hear when I'm reading that is, I'm not your number 1. So why would you want to give me that impression that I'm not your number 1? Now, honestly, I don't really change anything. My rank list is made. I'm not, I'm very confident in my program and in what we do. So it doesn't really, really matter for me. But that's how I read it, is like, why am I not your number 1? So I would suggest, don't go crazy sending all these emails at the end of the season. Just honestly pick who's your number 1 at the very end. And if that's not Jacoby, that's fine. I want people to go where they're going to be happy and successful. And send to that one program something saying, you are my number 1 program. And then don't send all the other ones to the top tier or whatever. I don't think it makes that much of an impression. Might even be bad.
Wow, thank you so much for clarifying that. I mean, that was very, very useful to understand when to send or not a letter of intent. Actually, the next question we wanted to ask is that when it comes to a candidate, what do you consider as a red flags?
Yeah, the red flags are not so surprising, I think. When we look at your transcripts and MSPEs, if someone has failed a course during first year, biology, biochemistry, not a big red flag, as long as they've done well after that. Could have been an easy fluke. I know when I was taking parasitology, when I was in medical school, I had the flu for the entire week before that test. I came this close to failing parasitology. I wouldn't want somebody holding that against me when I was applying for residency or whatever for the rest of my life. But if somebody fails a clinical rotation or gets a very low score on a clinical rotation, the internal medicine clerkship or something along those lines, that's obviously really going to come across as a red flag, especially because very few programs, very few medical schools, I know it's not necessarily true in every country, have people failing those rotations. I have seen schools in India where many people fail certain rotations. I know it's not uniformly true, but generally speaking, it's not extremely common to be failing these kinds of things. So that's a pretty big red flag. It's very hard to overcome afterwards. People will probably should be shooting for like a lower tier program where they maybe have less options. They don't get 5,600 applicants. The average program, I think, gets about 2,900 applicants. So, we have almost double that. There will be programs that have half that, maybe only 1,000 or 1,500. And people will have a much better chance if they have a red flag like that going to one of those programs. Also, someone who has no research, but says, I want to go into a research heavy specialty, GI, cardiology, hem-onc, again, that gets back to that consistent story. You're telling me that's what you're interested in. Maybe in your personal statement, maybe you said that. And then your file doesn't actually reflect somebody that's done the work to show they're interested in that area or to help build their resume for a future in that area. Also, just not having any research at all, or even like attempts, even posters or abstracts or anything, even if it's not articles, that will probably not fly as well in a program that is more research interested. The Jacoby has more of a research bent than maybe the average program. Whereas if you go to some rural hospital in middle America, they're probably going to on average have less of a research bent in that kind of hospital, and it might be less important to them. So the no research thing, it'll depend where you're applying and what your future goals are. And then the last thing I would say was a big one for red flags is the CV having a large gap. Everybody will have their own different decision for what is a large gap. I would say anything over a year, certainly by a year and up, you should really be explaining that gap in your personal statement. That's something I should have said during personal statements. Explain large gaps. If you have 6 months or less, no, you probably don't have to say that at all. That probably is taking off time to study for step 2, or you had a family issue, or whatever, something like that, something minor enough we're not going to really care that much. But definitely by a year and up, you should probably be explaining it. Doesn't mean every gap is going to kill you. We have a resident right now in our program at Jacobi that had taken off several years because of having children and wanting to spend time with them, and then decided to come back to medicine. And because the rest of her file was great, we still wanted her like we wanted anybody else that applied right out of medical school or shortly afterwards. So it's not that everything that's a gap will hurt you, but if it's explained reasonably, then I think you probably will be okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much for answering this question. And going for the other side, what to make an IMG stand out in the application?
Well, I guess I kind of addressed it a bit when I was talking about the consistency of your story flowing through the application, from what things you've done with your rotations and your research work and your volunteerism, leadership positions. Does that tell a story consistent with what we're talking about at the interview day, when we have that interview? Because really the application gets you the interview, and the interview is what gets you ranked highly at a program, because of what we said about interpersonal skills and all those kinds of things. But I'm listening for that consistency in your story. How are you thinking about your future? Maybe, again, not every program thinks like this, but I'm looking for people that are thinking ahead, that are really planning things. Doesn't mean you have to be certain by the time you're a final year medical student of your entire future, but I want to see people are considering their options and thinking about it thoughtfully, and not just meandering to the next thing in life and then praying that it takes them in some direction. So I think it's not exactly the file itself, it's more the thread throughout the file that I'm looking for, that shows me that consistency of a story in your file. I mean, the other things are more obvious, the high steps and the person who had the publication in the New England Journal of Medicine 2 months ago, and all that loveliness is the obvious stuff you don't need me to tell you. And I know very well, after talking to so many IMGs for so many years, that many of you do not have as many opportunities in other countries to do away electives to the US, to do research work, although with the advent of Zoom and, after COVID, lots of things going remote, like this discussion right now, there have been more abilities to reach out internationally and do research than ever before. So that's kind of nice. It's kind of helping to level the playing field a little bit. By the way, I guess I should mention, program directors in general, when we're looking at your CV about the research and seeing if it's strong for a program like ours, we do know which are the journals that you can just submit it to, and one of your friends reviews the article and you pay $500 and then it's just in the journal, and it doesn't mean it was a useful article. It doesn't mean it was actually any scientific benefit whatsoever to the world at large, and which journals are more actual academic journals. So again, you may not have as many options to choose, but if you can, trying to talk to your mentors, your research mentors, about which journals to submit to, and not just every single thing goes into curious. That was one of the common ones I saw. It was like 5 or 6 very, very, very common ones. There's, everything on your CV is curious, 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 curious. That's going to make me go, okay, same 5 authors, same 5 journals. These people just signed each other's work and it all went in and they all got credit for it. It doesn't really mean much. So if you can, try to lean towards making your strong research get into a highly considered journal if possible. By the way, my chief residents are probably watching this, going to tell me, why did you tell them every single thing about how to get into the program? Now we're going to have 1 million people telling us exactly what we want to hear. But when it comes down to it, I want what's best for everybody. And if I have to work harder to go through applications to find, I'll work harder. It's okay.
No, that's honestly, thank you so much. And again, thank you, Chief Residents from Jacobi Internal Medicine. We are very, very grateful to have all this perspective, how to create the most meaningful application, so we all have a chance. And like following with the chat, we started seeing lots of these types of questions. Aside from modeling all the things we can do, scores are many of the times something that we cannot change. Maybe we can overcome them. And this is the kind of questions we have. How can one overcome low scores if you still look at step one scores? And if should a person who had second or third attempts in USMLE still try to match? Those are the kind of questions we have right now.
Yes, I mean, those are several different questions in there. I'll try to remember all of them as I talk. The first one was about step one, which is obviously a lot less of a problem nowadays because it's gone no score. It's just pass fail. So as long as you take those, I guess, practice online tests that everybody seems to do, I guess mostly from that USMLE world or whatever question bank that is popular nowadays, and you can feel like you're consistently getting a passing score, then just take it and pass and move on with life. So that became easier. I think most programs in the US, you know, take step one more seriously, the score in the past. Jacobi, I've never ever taken step one more seriously for decades now. It's not been my focus. I think that's different than many places. And so I was more protected when step one went pass fail, because it was never my focus anyway. My focus for like a first screen, let's call it, because let's face it, 5,600 is impossible to go through. It's inhuman, was step two. That was always my go-to. It's more clinical. It's a more robust test. It gives a little bit better of an idea of what people can do to think more clinically. And every program is going to have their own cutoffs, and there's probably a rare program that has no cutoff, but realistically, most programs will have some cutoff. I even put on my website that we use 240, so it's not exactly a secret. And the reason I picked 240 is not subtle. It's the average score for the United States for the test. And I feel like we do very, very well. We get the top IMGs from all over the globe, thank God. And I can afford, in a manner of speaking, to interview the people that have the average and up. Does that mean we never interview anybody below 240? No, it doesn't mean that. We do interview every year a few people below 240. Do we interview anyone that's failed it? No, honestly, we don't. Having said that, that gets to one of your other questions, which is, you said if people have had a failure and then they retook it, let's say they failed step two and then they retook it and got a 240, should they still be applying for residencies? The answer is yes. Of course, you might have to aim lower. You know, you may have to pick a third tier school. Nobody ever actually defined exactly what's a first tier, second tier, and third tier school, but those terms are just used as a lesser residency, let's call it. But I have seen many people with failures of steps get in. I saw one person, he, I believe, had failed step one and two several times, 4 or 5 times, and then eventually got into a program. So I don't want anybody to lose hope. You should still be trying. You may want to consider, it's possible that internal medicine might not be a field you'll match into, and be willing to go to fields that are a little bit more accepting and less stressing of the steps. Family medicine, rehabs, preventative medicine. There's some specialties that are the have-nots, even though, of course, the haves are some of the surgical, ENT, ophthalmology. They get a, you know, they can have their pick of the litter of everybody that got a 270 on step two. But they're the have-nots, and maybe you want to reconsider and apply to some of the have-nots. And when it comes down to it, family medicine has a lot of similarities to medicine. You can still open an outpatient practice and take care of adults. And in some places even be a kind of a hospitalist. There are family medicine hospitalists in some places. Yeah, it's not going to help you get into cardiology if that's really your goal from birth, but you know, it's still a very fulfilling career to be a general internist. That's what I am. And you may want to consider a little bit more broadly. My last thought about the steps is, if your step two, let's say it was 235, and you missed some of the programs that use higher cutoffs at 240, you may want to consider taking step three, rocking it, and I'm going to define rocking it in a minute, and that way it shows that you can do even better than whatever was the medium level score you got on step two. And so what does rocking it mean? Now, any of the program directors that are at all sophisticated in this will know that it's harder, step three. The average score is a good bit lower, probably about 20 points. I'm rounding, of course, every year. I'm sure it's a little bit different. And so when I'm looking at a file and I see someone got a 235 on step two and got a 235 on step three, that's actually going up considerably. that's the equivalent of like a 255 on step 2, the 235 on step 3. So you don't have to go crazy about, oh my God, I shouldn't take it yet to step 3 because on my practice tests, I only get a 230 or a 240, and I really got to get a 250, 260, or I'll never get it anywhere. Even a score like that shows an improvement, shows a level higher. So it's something to consider.
Actually, I was going to ask you about the step 3. You actually one step forward, but I know that step 3 can be beneficial. If you take step 3, if you pass, it's good. But what if the applicant take the step 3 and fail? How bad it is?
Admittedly, a double-edged sword. I would not take it until you're sure you're going to do better than your step 2 score, because then it will hurt you. I've seen people with a 245 on step 2, see this all the time, and then their step 3, they already did it when I'm looking through the application, and the step 3 was a 212. And I'm looking at it thinking, not just is this person as smart as the 245 looked if they did that, mediocre on step 3, but also why didn't they plan ahead well enough to do, I don't know, enough practice or enough preparation to really, get that better score? Doesn't mean they automatically don't get it, but it is a little bit of a negative. And I'm looking at the totality of the file, and I have a little rubric that I will not be sharing during this presentation about how we score a file and therefore give it an A+ through an F. And how do we come up with that? That's personal. That's to every program. We'll be doing that differently. But it will give a little bit of a ding if I see that step 3 drop like that, even if it doesn't fully knock me out.
Thank you so much. We have some questions in the chat about observership and clerkship, and if you can guide us and how you see that, how is this medical experience in US, how makes the whole difference in the application?
Yeah, this is also obviously tricky for many IMGs because it seems to me like there's a differential in the ability to find these clerkships, sub-internships, externships, observerships between different countries. I notice it when I'm looking through because I look through regionally. I'll look through all of South America together and all of Africa together and all of Europe together, and I'll look through the regions of the globe, and I can see that some areas, for some reason, specifically Africa, but other areas as well, just have a very hard time getting here to do US clinical exposure. It might be having to do with money. It might be having to do with other resources or flights, or COVID screwed up a lot of that, of course, for a good year. So I know it's not easy for everyone. So no matter what I say now, I get it. I know it's not always possible, but there's an obvious pecking order. You really want to go to something with hands-on if you can. The sub-internships, the clerkships, the externships, those are the ones more likely to really give you a chance to do more. And therefore, the real utility, of course, in doing more is not the grade that you get from that rotation. It's the letter of recommendation, what they're going to be able to say about you based on the stories of what they saw you do. So it's indirectly about the letter, really. And then, of course, at the lower pecking level would be the observerships. And it still means something to me if it was a robust observership, and some places have robust ones and some places don't. In fact, I've seen multiple places where the people do observerships and then the letter of recommendation is the exact same letter for every person that rotated through there, with just the name of the person changed. That's ridiculous, of course. Those people are stealing from you, essentially. And I, at one point, considered posting the names of the people whose letters were useless on my website to help the IMGs, but I was counseled by the lawyer I spoke to that I can't do that or I can get sued for it. So I'm sorry. I'm trying to now figure out a different way to help you guys. What I'm thinking about doing, if I can find the time over the next month, is posting on the Jacoby website the places of people where I liked their letters. And that way, maybe you guys can try to go to those more because they'll be more useful, because that way I can't get sued for it, because I'm saying good things about the right letter writers, not bad things about the wrong letter writers. Gotta love America, land of the lawsuit. And The last thing on the totem pole, the worst possibility is really virtual rotations, virtual observerships, essentially. Many programs will not even read those letters. I do read them, but I read them with a jaundiced eye. Unless they can show me in the letter that there was a really robust experience, that they somehow got a really good feel for you in some way, shape, or form, it's not going to carry any weight to get you into a program. And you really need to have certainly at least one of your 4 letters, and preferably at least 2 of your 4 letters be from US letter writers if possible, because most letters from other countries, the program directors in America feel like we can't count on them. I've read literally thousands and thousands, even 10,000s of letters from other countries. So I know just from experience that there are some places, some medical schools in some countries where I can count on those letters. But for the most part, the average person is not really putting a lot of weight, or maybe any weight, on the letters from other countries. So you unfortunately are stuck trying to get those US clinical exposures just to get at least 2, if not more, letters from US physicians. The one back door I've seen people do is they'll know, because let's say a US physician has either moved to their country or maybe does some like mission and outreach mission or volunteerism in that country, and they get to know a US doctor from there, and then that person will write a letter based on their experience with them in the other country, as if it is a US letter writer, but they didn't work with them in the US. And that has its ups and downs. Like, it still gives me an opinion of someone who probably has an idea of what we're looking for with communication skills and their abilities. But of course, they're not seeing you communicating with Americans. They're seeing you communicate with people that are not American. And it may not translate perfectly to how you'll interact in this pretty incredibly diverse environment that is the US, and certainly the Bronx, where I am. Was that okay? Any other thoughts about that I can address?
No, like exactly what you said. Like we received like some questions about a letter of recommendation from the country that the person graduated. So you kind of already answered it. We are having a lot of questions in the chat. Yes, do you have another one ready for ask?
I have been seeing one that has been repeating somehow. Like it says, what do you think about recommendations from current residents in the program? When is a good time to request connections to say a word? What are your thoughts about this?
Can you do it slower? I just didn't quite catch that. I apologize.
Yeah. Like what do you think about recommendations? I'm guessing that's getting recommendations from the current residents of the program, and when is a good time to request a connection to say a word?
So if you know people, let's say from your home medical school or just friends of yours that have gone to different programs in the US, that is probably your absolute best source of information. Having an insider essentially tell you what the program is really like. When it comes down to it, even though I do that 55-minute presentation that I talked to you about before, I know the applicants believe nothing I say until they speak to my residents. So we have them talk to the residents the night before for interview days, and we have residents pop in as much as they can during the interview day virtually to talk to them, because I want to make sure they get that inside scoop from our residents. So if you have that already from people you know, fantastic. That's really going to give you a feel for that program. Having said that, of course, 1% of any program is upset for whatever. They were a bad match to the program, they're not doing well, they don't like X, Y, or Z. You don't necessarily want to be talking to that 1%. You want to be talking to the 99%, but such is life. As for asking the program, if the program isn't doing what my program is doing, finding ways to get the house staff on your radar, that's probably a red flag to me. That's a program that's probably hiding something. I don't want to disparage other programs, but in my opinion, that's what that would be like, is that they don't want you to get the real lowdown from the house staff. Things have gotten a little bit more awkward in the virtual world now that interviews are essentially all virtual, with trying to connect people to the house staff like that. But if I can figure out a way to do it, I'm sure most programs can figure out a way to do it. And as for, I think you added a part of that question of an applicant like asking to connect with someone specific. that's totally kosher. That's totally reasonable. When we have someone say, you know, I know, let's say I'm interested in parasitology, I want to go into infectious diseases, and I know you have Dr. Coyle, she's an internationally well-known parasitologist at our program. Can you put me in touch with her? Or they want to think about our primary care track. Can you put me in touch after the interview day with a resident who's currently in the primary care track? Because randomly no resident from the primary care track popped in today, which happens. It's only a small part of our program. It's only 12 people out of 102 in Jacoby. And then we will say, sure, of course, just tell that to Penny, our program coordinator. That's probably what you do for any program, is talk to the program coordinator, and she'll connect you to that person after the interview day ends. Because of course you probably have many days, weeks, or even months after that interview before you have to make your rank list and submit it. So you have plenty of time to connect with people over time at those programs. And that's totally reasonable. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And before we makes her last question, just for everyone that's watching us, tomorrow, Jacoby will have their open house. Look at Dr. Andrews' Twitter. I will add here the information, but go ahead, Wayne. Oh, Wayne already added it. Thank you.
I will bet you that I get asked almost the exact same questions tomorrow, and that's okay. Like I said, happy to talk about things, because even if people don't come to me, it'll help them figure out where to go that works best for them.
Okay, thank you so much. And actually, we're shifting a little bit our conversation. I wanted to ask you about when you ask about hobbies, what is it better to mention many hobbies or just focus on one hobby during the interview?
I would say whatever you're going to do, whether you want to talk about one or more than one, you should make it robust. Not just the person says to you during the interview, so what do you like to do when you're not doing medicine, or some version of that question, because that's essentially asking you what your hobbies are. And saying, well, I like to read and play video games, and I'm on the soccer team, and I can read that in your resume. It's probably already in there. There's a place in the ERAS for hobbies. I've probably seen that. I may have even asked you a question about something on your hobby list occasionally. But if you took that one thing and said, well, I'm actually on my soccer team for my medical school, and for 2 of the 4 years, I was the captain of the team, and what that involved as a leadership opportunity for me, not just for fun, but was also to grow in how to guide the team towards the championship that we wound up winning during my final year on the team. Now you're really broadening it to really make it both a robust hobby, something that you really spend time on and you care about, and even using it as an example of why I want you in my program, that you can lead and you can take people to a higher level. And that's something almost every doctor needs to do at some level. So that's how I see it. If you can connect with the interviewer, all the better. Like, let's say you look behind me when I'm interviewing, not right now today, but when I'm interviewing for my program, on my wall behind me are like a bunch of awards I've won. It's unfortunate because my camera doesn't face my fun wall, which has pictures my kids drew, but such is life. But if someone noticed a certain award there and said, oh, you were a Phi Beta Kappa in college. My father was a Phi Beta Kappa in his college, and he told me all about it. Like, that's just a sort of silly, flippant example, but maybe you see, I have a picture of my 3 kids behind me at work, and you ask, oh, I see you have a picture of your children. How old are they? And are any of them going into medicine? Finding little ways to connect with people is always going to be the best way to make a good impression. They feel like it's more personal then, kind of like when I'm teaching my 2nd-year residents and I do an CEX, that's a direct observation. We go watch how they do an entire history and physical. I'm looking to see, are they finding connecting moments with the patient? So it's not just about getting the HPI, it's also about getting the trust of the patient. And it's the same thing with the interviewer. Are you finding little connecting moments to make sure that they really feel connected to you and they feel like they want you as that person, not just as the doctor, like we started off earlier on? Sorry, I sometimes just go into tangents about things that are relevant in my job. So I'm not just trying to plug Jacoby, I promise. I'll do that tomorrow.
Thank you so much. There was a question in the chat I'm not finding, but I will kind of make up the question, was asking about the visa, J1 and HB1, And if you can give a little some thoughts about that, that can help everyone here.
This was just on my mind Monday because I have a meeting with my chief residents every Monday, and for some reason it came up, I guess because they're applying for fellowships now also, much like our third years are applying for fellowships. So the whole visa thing came up, and it's so personalized and so tricky because when it comes down to it, there are upsides and downsides of both. And many of you probably already know this, so stop me if I'm being redundant. But the J1, you probably know it's 7 years, and the people that are on a J1 have to return to their country for, I believe it's 2 years before they can come back to the US and practice. Or find a J1 waiver job and work for a couple of years. It's 2 or 3 years. And that's not easy to do. There are only a very limited number of J1 visa jobs. And if you're going to go into a fellowship and then want to find a J1 visa only in that specific subspecialty, again, even harder to find, like less and less jobs available. So for the person that really wants to stay in the US after doing their training, that's the big downside of the J1. The upside of the J1, of course, is it's a longer time, the 7 years. It's got lower costs involved. There are many more programs that accept J1s than H1s. It's probably 4 times more programs that take a J1 than an H1, give or take. It's about a 3-to-1 ratio, so about 4 times more programs. And in that sense, you have more opportunity. And even for the fellowships, it's the same thing. If you're on the J1, you're going to have many more programs willing to take a J1 than are willing to take an H1B. The H1B, the opposite side of the coin, you have 6 years. You renew for 3 years after the first 3 years. And it's a work visa. So it's a lot easier to stay in the US afterwards, to work as a hospitalist while trying to get a green card, or while working in a subspecialty fellowship while trying to get a green card. People can apply for alien of extraordinary abilities off of that, things like that, and get green cards in other ways. So for the person that wants to stay in the US permanently, is pretty sure of that, I personally suggest, I know it's personal, you can decide on your own, I'm not pushing it, I suggest the H1B is a little bit better. It's easier for me to say because I'm getting the top people on the globe at Jacobi, so they're going to have a higher chance of getting into fellowships anyway. And so even if they're only applying to 50 or 60 fellowships, because those are the ones that take the H1B, while my J1 resident who's trying for cardiology applies to 200 fellowships because there's so many more that take a J1. And yet my people applying for the H1 are still going to get into those 50, 60 fellowships because I have the best people. If you're going to a program, or maybe you know that you're not as competitive as that, then maybe you want to try for the J1 just so you can have that broader application for fellowship. If you're really so gung-ho about getting that fellowship, that might sway you. But those are how I break it down to the strengths and weaknesses of each one. I know at Jacobi, we've definitely pushed towards the H1B visa. And one last thing I forgot to mention. I just really realized this over the last couple of years. The J1 can be tricky for getting a chief year because on the J1, you can't bill for anything. You can't bill for patient care. And many, if not most, chief years, they want you to be involved in also being an attending on the floors or an attending precepting in clinic, and you're going to need to be able to bill for that. So there are many programs that won't even take J1 people for a chief year. And so if that's something that weighs heavily for you, you want a chief year because it'll help you with a future career, or it'll help you get into the fellowship of your dreams or whatever, then you might want to consider not doing the J1 just because of that. Having said that, Jacobi does allow J1 and H1B chiefs. We figure out ways to kind of work around it, but not every program will.
Thank you so much. That's very important, especially for us as IMGs. Unfortunately, we have reached to the end of this interview. We have talked about absolutely everything. For everyone who's going to join tomorrow to Jacobi's open house,
I hope so.
We already put here the link. And also you can go and visit their page of how to apply, so you can have a better idea and use the time the best you can. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Andrew.
Thank you so much for having me. This was great. I hope I helped some people out there.
Thank you so much. And Deborah would say thank you. This was an amazing evening here in Texas.
It was fun. It's nice meeting all of you.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.